And hello, Internet. I see already that there are people in the chat. Hey, folks. How are we all doing? Who do we got in the chat today? We have Young Anarchy, Bomachek, Waldo Janse von Rensburg, Michael Kirschner, and just the letter C. Who came right from the Sesame Street set in order to be here on. Get it? Because it's brought to you by like the letter C. Anyways, if my fan is being too noisy, I can turn it off, but I prefer not to. Anyways, for anybody who is new to this show, I am Tristan, and this is Step Back, and every week before a new video goes live, I hang out with the audience and get you guys all hyped up for the next video, and answer some questions, and generally we hang out. So yeah. Oh, and there's Phoebes. Hey, Phoebes. So someone's asking how my week was. My week was all right. It's been kind of interesting. Basically, just trying to balance all these domains of my life together, which is kind of interesting. But still, things are going well. I premiered, for anybody who didn't know, I premiered the weekly stream that I do on Tuesday nights called Step Back Tonight, and that came out yesterday, or sorry, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Jeez. And it was really fun. You guys had a lot of things and a lot of questions, a lot of feedback, and I'm currently thinking about what kinds of things I want to do for the next episodes, because it was really fun, and there was a lot of good talking, but I see that things are already heating up. So let's see. We've got a pretty crazy video coming out today too. For the patrons, you kind of like, whenever I make a video, I can kind of get a feel for how a video is going to do based on the patrons and how the patrons have responded to the video coming out. And let's just say that, seeing that it was out for, turn that off. Forgot I'm on. Oh, and if you don't like using the YouTube live interface, if you go on Twitch at twitch.tv/stepbackhistory, I actually use that as well. So if that's like a place you want to be, you can totally do that. And I'm live here now, so there you go. Anyways, yeah. So if patrons are in any way indicative of how a video is going to perform, I have 79 patrons, and this video has 25 views, so that is a very good sign. And also, it just seems to be going down really well, so everything's going to get really excited. And, oh boy. I know that only a few people have seen it. I know that 255 AD, who's in the chat, has seen it. And it's about beer. It's an Oktoberfest video. Although I don't talk about Oktoberfest, but I do talk about beer, and I talk about gender. And yeah, Phoebe's here. Hey. So as I hang out with my old cat here, what do you guys want to talk about this week? I know on Tuesday I just ate up so many questions that now got to think about what to make the energy about for the next video. I'm kind of poking at the beginnings of what the next script is going to be like, so that's fun. I am also taking a online course on storytelling that I was going through right before I came onto this thing, and I don't know if somebody saw, but I went on a huge Twitter rant about narrative and storytelling, so like that's a thing. We'll donate to the channel as soon as our economy exits this recession. Aw, that's very kind of you. Don't ever send me money that you don't feel like you can part with. But if you want to support Step Back, I would be totally cool to do it. All right. Oh, we got some questions. Nice. All right, let me just write these down real quick so I don't forget them, because I forget everything. Okay, so Girthax, you got the first question. Under your ideal UBI system, what social programs would you want to keep and what would you want to get rid of? I do think that if there was like a basic UBI system that was made variable so that people who had different levels of needs were able to make a living wage, that would be an interesting way to go. But I do think that if there were social program, I think that most of the social programs that we keep today, like, just because people are all making the same amount of money doesn't mean that people aren't going to need social assistance. It might not be in the form of money, but there could be other things to be taken care of. I do think that things like making sure that there's good social housing for those who are just living on UBI. I do think that having a good department of trying to make sure that the living standards on people who are making a UBI level income are still good. Because I do feel like with the way markets work, if everybody made the same amount of money, prices would adjust, and being a UBI person who just lives off of it would lose you a lot of money. It would basically end up being poverty wages, and you would need to have some sort of organization to make sure that there are still things that people need for those who are living off of your UBI. I honestly get less and less optimistic about as UBI as a long-term solution the more I hear about it. All right. Is there any social programs I'd like to get rid of? The social programs I'd like to get rid of, though, on that front would be things like subsidies for corporations, especially those who are making things like that we should be moving away from. Like, I do think that subsidies for oil and things like that should definitely be going away. All right, Luke Lee. How old is Phoebe? Phoebe here. She's like a little bit under the camera, but there she is. Phoebe is 10, or she will be probably in like January, right? She was born in 2009, I think. So she's gonna be 10. I don't know. I got her from, well, basically my wife had her as a pet before we even met, and then we moved in together. I kind of got her, so that's kind of where I am now. But that was long before I met her, so you know, this is where we're going. She's 10. She's an old cat, or at least she's like a middle-aged cat. What causes a lot of friction in the house is that I have another cat named Romeo, and he's only like 4, maybe 5. No, he's not 5. We got him in 2015, and he was already a year old, so that would put him he would be 4. So he's like 4 years old, and she's 9, and so there are very different stages in cat life. And Phoebe here likes to see if I can adjust the camera just a little bit so you guys can see more cat. But Phoebe she's a bit older. She's an older lady, and Romeo is still very much like a cat kitten in many ways. So that's like, that causes tension. They get in fights a lot. She is a sweetheart. Phoebe is a very, she's very affectionate. She's very, one thing that's really strange about her is she never meows. She has like meowed, she meows so infrequently that, it actually is like an event if you hear it. She just never makes any noise, um, which is so strange because I've grown up with cats my whole life, and so I've never seen a cat that is um, so quiet and so well behaved, I guess. Um, yeah. So, anyways, she's pretty great. Also, we didn't do this, but she is declawed, or at least her front claws are declawed, which makes her much easier to cuddle with. Um, she came that way, at least to me. I don't know. I don't know the full story about what happened to her, but yeah, and she's being very cute right now. Okay. Next question. 255 AD. I know that so many people ask me that they want to see more of the cats, so this is perfect. It's 255 AD. Suppose we created a portal to an alternate Earth where humanity is still in the Bronze Age. What happens when a capitalist world comes into contact with one that's yet to even invent coins? I think that okay. The first thing I think that would happen is you would see a massive biological issue. I do think that in time travel fiction, one of the things that we don't talk about very much is that, like, if we were to teleport into the past, the first things that would happen is we would probably die of some sort of disease, and we would probably inflict some sort of disease on that society that would end up killing them. A whole lot of them, anyway. Because immunities and like immunities do eventually wear out, because like the immunities that we've developed are only to like the most like to viruses we've been exposed to, and to have like viruses that like we're not ready to deal with like smallpox and things like that, and also their society is not used to bacteria that have been evolving to deal with bacteria that have evolved to deal with antibiotics for a century now. Like, that's like a whole thing that we would never like. There'd be so that would be a huge first thing. Like, a lot of people would die on both sides pretty fast. Probably more on the side of the Bronze Age people. I feel like this is not the kind of answer to the question that you would want, though. I do think that a world where a lot of the resources have been untapped and the population is rather small would have huge economic ramifications, because I mean, we'd be able to overpower them instantly. There would be some pretense about trying to preserve their culture, and there would probably be some people, myself included, who would say we really shouldn't interact with them and let them just develop on their own. But that would be quickly ignored, and we would go over and we would probably they would be very unusable in the modern economy, so they wouldn't last long. They would be very quickly turned into impoverished people living in a society, and we would have the opportunity to expand and exploit over multiple two planets, which would be kind of terrifying in the resource department. So yeah, it would be pretty rough. But yeah, we are the descendants of people who lived through things like the Black Death and the Spanish flu and all those things, and they haven't. So like I could see some majorly bad stuff happening. Sebastian, what's Phoebe's favorite food? I don't know. What is your favorite food, Phoebes? I think her favorite. She's like. That's another thing about her that's a little unlike a lot of cats, is that she's not super into human food. Like, yeah, like if we have food that we've left uneaten, or if we try to give her like anything from our collection of stuff, unless she's really really hungry, she's like not interested. She really likes cat food, but really doesn't touch anything else. I will say, I think that oh, there she is again. Hi. I do think that there is I think that she's a big fan of I'm trying to remember, like, my wife used to eat would used to give her yogurt a long time ago, so she would eat yogurt. Um, but also she would do. She also likes to do weird things like lick canvas bags and stuff like that. So I don't know. Does that count? Um. Oh my. Okay. So, Night Watcher's Pet, what do you think we should? What do you think would be a good next step after UBI if it were to be tried? That would be probably the systematic eliminating of private ownership of the means of production. So that would be nationalizing all industry, all of it, no exceptions. Just take all private industry and turn it into a public utility. Um, I mean, the way the capitalism's going these days, it wouldn't be that hard. Like, can you imagine? Like, you could nationalize a good chunk of the economy if you just nationalized Amazon, for example. So, you know. I see Ron. Hello, Ron. Yeah, so maybe I should just, like, I'll put the camera a bit lower so you can see her. Obviously, she's way more important than I am. So, yeah, so I do think that, like, UBI would be a good way to weather the eccentricities of late capitalism as we transition into a post-capitalist sort of form. Okay. 255 AD wants to know, what's the best place to be born female in AD 1400? Okay, 1400. That is the late Middle Ages, like the last century of what would be called like the Middle Ages. So colonization wouldn't be a thing. I would probably have to say that the best place to be a woman in 1400 is probably some like aristocratic position in China. I do imagine that living in China in 1400, being well off and being a woman, I feel like if you study Chinese history, there's a lot more women who had some form of social mobility, and that just that seems to be that would be a place. If I were to choose a place, that's probably where I would go. The Americas would also be pretty good. I do think that like living in modern day Canada or the United States in 1400 would also be a pretty good place to live, or in Mesoamerica. But the role of women in pre-Columbian North American societies was pretty good, and I do think that that would be a pretty good way to live. That's for sure. So yeah, I do think maybe living in the Iroquois Confederacy would be a better answer. I was limited in my imagination on that one. I apologize for that. Yeah. Okay. Waldo, you're getting Terra Nova vibes from that question. Was Terra Nova the name of that show? I think I watched like one episode of it where like they found a portal that let them go back to like dinosaur times, but it didn't affect the present because it was like a multiverse thing. So basically, the place they went was like this. It was like this colony in like a past version of the Earth with dinosaurs. That's that'd be a pretty good one. That yeah. Hey Phoebe. Man, she really was foot binding a thing in early Ming China? I actually don't know. It's a good question. Michael Collins, Tristan, what if we abandoned currency and went back to bartering? Bartering, that would be difficult. Um, Bartering wasn't even really a dominant form of economics, even in the times that we think that it was dominant. Bartering only really is feasible in a very small context of trade. And even then, even in like the oldest of economic systems, we still had things like sticks that we would put notches on to delineate debt that people would then trade with each other. Like the quicker that we could move to um, a common trading item, things the better off things were. That very quickly made the economy way more functional. Now, uh, I would think that an ideal society would not be one that uses bartering or currency. It would use uh, sort of a mutual aid type of situation. Yeah, bartering is kind of a myth. It was, I mean, it was a way to example like run the informal economy in a very simple way, but it was never a large scale functioning thing. And really, what we would call bartering was more just like what we would think of as giving stuff to our friends and owing stuff to friends. Like, I owe my friend a beer and that kind of thing. Which is how a lot of economics worked for a long time. Um, yeah. So, 255 AD, why was there more social mobility when baby boomers were young? That is because when baby boomers were young, they were living in the wake of the Second World War, and they also were around at a time when a lot of the protections against the excesses of capitalism were at their strongest. So, like, if you look at a chart, at least in the United States, of like um, income inequality, the 1950s and 1960s were the time when income inequality in the U.S. was at its lowest, and that had a lot to do with things like the GI Bill, which made sure that a lot of people who were veterans of World War II were given a lot education and a cheap place to live and like things like that. And on top of that, because the U.S. was producing something like 49 to 51% of all goods on Earth right after World War II, the market share that the United States held uh, was just unbelievable, and so the U.S. was going through massive economic growth in the decades after World War II. That basically lasted until the mid 1970s. And so that's just like they were able to grow up because they were able to grow up in a better or a higher society for social mobility because the government had much tighter controls on the economy back then, and it led to much lower inequality. Union membership was a lot higher, and on top of that, and because of those policies, the U.S. was going through a massive economic boom. And so baby boomers grew up without having to worry about the ups and downs of recessions. It wasn't until they were in their like 20s and 30s that they ever actually had to deal with real economic recession. Even then, it was just it was economic stagnation. It was hardly like collapse. So it was really easy for kids who had like no educate or who had parents who didn't have any education for them to get education. So you had a lot, and there was a lot more work because the economy was expanding at such a fast speed. So a lot of people were able to do better than their parents. But then once they got wealthy, they then voted for tax cuts and declining membership and things, and neoliberalism took hold. And basically, ever since then, the abilities for social mobility have been going down. And millennials came of age right when the economy collapsed in 2008, about 10 years ago now, almost to the day. And that has basically been the story of millennial adulthood. And so, yeah. Alright, loading. What is your opinion on Ireland going from one of the most conservative countries in Europe to one of the furthest progressive countries with the whole referendum after happening? I'm not exactly sure. I haven't kept abreast of the what's going on in Ireland, but if I look at the step back video submission idea, it looks like Ireland is on the. I'm going to be doing a video about Ireland probably sometime later this fall. So I guess I'll have to look it up. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure, really. Yeah. The worst parts of the recession happened in September of 2008, which was about 10 years ago. So it's been 10 years. Oh man, Phoebes is making quite a face. I know that she's way cuter than me, and I know this is going to bring out way more viewers than my face, so I think this is a perfect camera angle. Are you familiar with the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology's October 2011 survey on global financial system that showed that 1,318 corporations control 80% of global revenue? Well, I am now, but that isn't. I'm surprised that it's that much. I thought that I would honestly think that like 80% of the economy might be run by like 10 corporations, and right now Phoebe is licking me. I'm not sure what that's all about. Ow, 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 ow. Ow! Why are you biting me? Just like, don't scratch me. Or don't scratch my tummy. So. Call it the Phoebe stream. I should. So we're due for another recession very soon. I do think so. Especially because after the recession, the stuff that was put in place to protect the world financial system was the Dodd-Frank Act, and that did not do very much. And then even that got stripped back massively recently by Trump. So, and a lot of the people who did all of the sort of sneaky financial crap that led to that version of the recession are still working. And so I imagine that you're not really going to see permanent. You're going to probably see another recession that's just as bad. Who knows what it's in now? You know, boom and bust cycles. That's what it's all about. And the other thing too is that once the 2008 recession did like rebound, the jobs that were lost when the recession happened never came back. They went more into automation and outsourcing, and so very much way more automation than outsourcing. So a lot of work, a lot of jobs are just gone, and that's probably. But yeah. Okay, Waldo. If people get paid based on the time that they work and things that are valued on the amount of time it takes to make, will all lazy people be poor? Will all the lazy people be poor? Jeez. I mean, if people were paid and the value of things were done by how much time you worked and the time that went into things, you would find that capitalists would be very poor. You would find that like the people who own corporations would be would just make no money, um, because they don't do any actual work. They just own things that make money for them. And so that would basically be that. Yeah, I do think that that's pretty likely. Um, oh man, that's sad. Girthax, do you think it's fucked up that Planned Parenthood lobbies against single-payer healthcare? Yeah, I do. So, Planned Parenthood, they advocate for single-payer, or they advocate against single-payer healthcare for reasons of mostly of self-preservation. Planned Parenthood, for the most part, exists because there is no public health service in America. So things like family planning and knowledge about abortion services and health and pregnancy care and things like that, like Planned Parenthood comes in and steps in to, fill in where the health industry doesn't work. But on top of that, I imagine that Planned Parenthood makes a decent amount of money from health insurance companies, just from having health insurance companies send people to them and things like that. I imagine that some of the work they do ends up with them billing health insurance companies. And so it makes complete sense to me that Planned Parenthood would be anti public health care. If the people in Planned Parenthood cared less about maintaining their own relevance and more about ensuring better care for the reproductive health of women in America, they would be for a public health care service, because then Planned Parenthood would it's like if a charity existed but had the opportunity, but also advocated against a thing that would solve the problem that they're a charity to try and solve, but then they keep it going because they want to keep themselves relevant and in a position, and that's interesting. I'm not exactly sure where to go from there. But there's a reason why there aren't Planned Parenthoods really in other countries, or at least in Canada, because if you want to get an abortion, you just go to the doctor. The doctor does it. They're government employees. They can't refuse to do it for you. Okay. Michael Collins, how likely is World War III even with no nuclear weapons? I don't see World War III being all that likely. I do think that given the apocalyptic ramifications of getting involved in World War III, that there would be nobody who would make that sort of decision willingly. With World War I and World War II, it was sort of the collapse of the Victorian coalition system and the lack of having a international body. Oh, there she goes. All right. Show's over, everybody. The cat's gone. But the reason why World War I and World War II happened is because they were failures of the international community, because there was no place for countries in a public space to work out their problems. And so the UN was set up after World War II to try and prevent that. And also on top of that, you have the mutually assured destruction aspect of nuclear weapons. So at the moment, I do think that you'd have tense military situations and proxy wars, but I think the fact that the Cold War didn't break into an actual war, and that's about as tense as it's ever gotten, shows that full out thermonuclear apocalypse is unlikely. I do think that what worries me a little bit about is more that if we have a breakdown of the international system through Trump and stuff like that, that you're gonna find more just smaller conflicts and more like bullying of countries, like how Saudi Arabia feels like it has the permission to bully Canada now, um, and things like that can keep happening. I do think that if there was a World War III, that it would be more due to some sort of accident than like something like the Triple Entente and Triple Alliance back and forth, for example. And so I see that as the main thing. I also, if you read this book called, is it Command and Control? I'm not exactly sure what the name of the book is, but it's a good one. Okie dokie. But it's about nuclear weapons and how, I think it's like Eric Schlosser, Command and Control or something like that. But it shows that there's actually been a lot of situations with nuclear weapons being almost going off because of like, not because of like people wanting to fire them, but because of like accidents. And I could see if a World War III broke up and a nuclear exchange happened, it could be because of a miscommunication or because of an explosion going off and people not knowing what's going on and having all these automated systems that have really never been tested in the real world. Just seeing like things like the dead man's switch in Russia, and things like the NATO like NORAD's whole like radar system. Like, we've never had a real nuclear war to test all of these systems to see what would happen, and I could very much see a nuclear exchange happening due to an accident setting off a whole bunch of automatic systems. But I also like sleeping at night, so I don't think about that very much. But yeah, if you want to read a really interesting book about nuclear weapons and the realities of maintaining nuclear weapons and the sort of how haphazard the system really is and how the American military works, you should definitely read Command and Control by Eric Schlosser. It is one of my faves. I read it during comps and I learned a lot, and it's just really good. Alright, Geshtin, isn't UBI just a band-aid over a gaping wound that would need a bigger fix? I'm wary of it because even right-wing people sometimes advocate for it. Geshtin, I think you're right. I do think that any reasonable left-wing person would know that UBI is a band-aid at best, and has serious negative economic ramifications for long-term use. That being said, it is a band-aid. Sometimes you need band-aids. Like, band-aids are not good long-term solutions, but they're very good short-term solutions. And I do think that UBI could be a very good thing to have in our late capitalist system we have right now, that is something that would make a lot of people's lives better, would be a stepping stone towards a communist mode of communist economy. And on top of that, looks like something that we could, in the not-too-distant future, actually pass and get through government and actually get the political will on board to happen, which isn't easy. So the idea that the reason, because UBI is so, is becoming more politically palatable, it is a thing that we could do soon, like within a decade, that could make a big and positive change. And I think that once we have the UBI system in place, and once we get used to that concept, that the state and the common coffers are a thing that we can use to make sure that everybody stays afloat and we can all help each other out. I do think that if we can keep that going, then we'll be in a situation where we could maybe prep socially and build the narrative that moves towards a economy that doesn't function on money. But I think it's good for what it is. I think it is a powerful idea in the fact that I think that you said even right-wing people support it. The fact that there is something that we can push that massively redistributes wealth in the economy that even the right wing can get on board with, shows that it has it has promising ideas. However, if we saw UBI as the be all and end all of solving economic inequality, you're going to be in for a bad time. I could see a lot of very bad long term consequences of using UBI that I would really prefer we didn't do. Okay. Suppose the entire world was anarcho-communist. How confident are you that people born in the future wouldn't try to recreate capitalism? I do think that. See, the thing is, like, if we had the anarcho-communist society and built on things, and we had a good, like, reasoned redistribution of resources for people, given the way, like, how powerful the technology of the economy is, the way the world works is that as automation and the ability to produce things with less work becomes more, like the amount of work to make the things that we need in our world go down rather than up, that the chances of capitalism coming back get lower. So, like, even today, if we were able to just reset this, like, stagnant social structure we have built on top of our economy and move towards a anarcho-communist society, a lot of people would realize that their lives would be way better than they are back then, like under this system. There's a lot of people, like my life would be significantly better if I lived in an anarcho-communist system, and many of you, as I imagine, as well. Like physically, like the things that you have access to, the joys in your life, the amount of hours you spend working would be so different. And I don't see, like, capitalism emerged out of a feudal society. It basically emerged because of the introduction of industrialization to a feudal economy. And so if something were to evolve out of that, like it was very contextual, historically contextual. And so I don't see it being very likely for capitalism to re-establish itself after, say, several generations of living under a anarcho-communist society. If you were to go strictly by Marxist thinking, that communism, because it doesn't have two classes, would be the last major revolution in the world, would kind of be like an end of history. But I imagine that there could be other paradigms that could happen. It's just that we don't know them yet. Speculating about the politics of a world that hasn't even had a chance to exist yet would be difficult to say the least. So, like, the crises of capitalism are happening right now, and replacing those with a system that we seem to like a lot more is one thing. But then, is like the way that we think about anarcho-communism, is that due to change in, like, after like several hundred years of anarcho-communism? I don't know. There's reason to think it won't. There's reasons to think it could. If there's one thing consistent about human history, it's that we're always changing things. And in many ways, I know a lot of ANCOMs would hate to hear this, but anarchism and an anarchist society would in many ways, on a big scale like this, would actually be an experiment, and there would be a lot of kinks to work out, and we would have to figure out how to make things work. It wouldn't be perfect. It would take time to work out what's the best way to organize a world like that. And I do think that there are a lot of people who believe in the state, like tankies, or anti-communist, capitalists and liberals who seem to say simultaneously that anarchists are, one, impractical people who live in theory in La La Land, but then also criticize anarchists because we don't have a consistent theory and we don't have enough La La Land to imagine how every single problem of the world would be addressed under a new government paradigm, and like we're often charged to like, you know, change the like fix all of the problems in the world today that capitalism has yet to address. But and that's like super duper unfair. I do think that one of the things that makes anarchism, especially why I think anarchism is a better method of human coordination than like tanky communism, is because anarchism is very explicitly not interested in theory. Marx would not like anarchists. Anarchists do not believe in the prevalence of theory. Sorry, Tabby. Anarchists are overwhelmed, are more preoccupied with the concept, and this is super academic-y jargon, but the concept of praxis. And so anarchists should embrace that, like, there isn't going to be one solution for how an economy should work, or how to deal with crime, like even what like laws to pass and policies to make, like even the concept of policies having one rule that applies to all situations, like all these things are never work out in practice. And I do think that anarchists would do best embracing that we would need to move towards an ad hoc sort of very localized method of organizing that would be based on figuring things out for ourselves and figuring out ways and experimenting and trying new things. And I do think that will be a process of always learning and growing and learning from others and growing from others. And I do think that like that is the strength of anarchism, that it is extremely practical. It is extremely based on not having a grand unified theory as to how the world will work, like capitalists have, like liberals have, like Marxist-Leninists have, but instead having a idea of like, we want to make the world better based on a few principles. We want to make the world non-hierarchical and not based on coercion, and how that would look, it would be dependent upon the context, and we would work it out. And I think that that's a strength. That's not a weakness. Okay. Where does one corporation end and another start? Okay. How old is capitalism? David Graeber says it started in the 1200s. Do you think that that's putting it too far back? No. So capitalism is, the idea is that what makes capitalism distinct from feudalism, because I thought there was like a back and forth about what's the difference between capitalism and feudalism, and there is a significant difference. It's just not in the social relations. Capitalism is distinct from feudalism because capitalism has power based on wealth, and wealth specifically derived from the ownership of things that produce, like objects that produce commodities, rather than land that produces commodities. Like feudalism is based on the ownership of land and tithing and things like that. And feudalism is very much a product of a society where almost every single thing that comes out of every single economic product literally grows out of the ground. Feudalism, this is why feudalism is the system that's obsessed with titles and land appropriation and owning territory and painting that map in your color, because feudalism is from farming. And farming, in the days where you didn't have massive technological gains, the amount of land you owned was directly proportional to how much money you had. Like, the more land you had under you, the more wealthy you could be. And so feudalism was very much an agricultural way of organizing a society. Capitalism is what broke feudalism, because capitalism happened when you started to introduce things like manufactuaries, where objects that weren't made in a farm but kind of were secondary products, which for the longest time were just made at home, were able to be centralized. And they found that it was much more efficient, say, to, instead of having every single household make their own clothes, to have a textile manufactory where people would come together and work together in one place to make these products. And then when that turned out to be way more profitable than farming, you started to have a new class of bourgeoisie capitalists who were making money off of assets they owned rather than land that they owned. And that is the big major change between the two. That is the tension that you see in the early modern period that starts in like 1200, but really starts to become more of a thing in like the 18th century, where you start to see, especially, and it starts to become a really big thing in the 19th century when industrialization starts to take place, which is the moving of the focus of an economy from farming to industrially made consumable goods. And that is the distinction between capitalism and feudalism. But like things like hereditary wealth is not a distinction between the two. Things like that are like that's the kind of things that I think that we don't consider. But there is a distinct difference between feudalism and capitalism based on where how power is derived and what sort of economy it rules over. Like, this is why I don't think that like you couldn't really have a feudal society ruling over a industrial economy for very long, because it's just inherently unsustainable. And the idea of having power based on those kinds of things is chaotic. A good example: there were there were some very rich parts there were very rich areas in the Middle Ages that were not feudalist. They were like republics, like trade republics in Italy, and they did not have lots of territory. They were city-states that made money through trading, and there were very few sustainable economies because of that. Like very few sustainable like monarchies. They were usually these like oligarchic kind of like capitalists, like rich families basically owned the city. And yeah, that changed a lot. All right, I'm gonna have to go through these things because I have 7 minutes left, and I have 17 questions, so I'm gonna try to get through these things. What do you think the next generation's lives will be affected by our modern, their past actions, such as Trump and socialism and national populism's rise? I think the biggest thing you'll notice is that the Overton window has been blown wide open. That is a massive change that's happened. So the idea of in next generations will have a way wider choice of political opinions to have than they had in the past. How do you see the world changing in the next 30 years? I feel like it's going by the old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. You see that there's there's a lot of change going through. The next 30 years are going to be fairly interesting. It's going to be fairly chaotic because a lot of systems that have been running the world for the last 40 years or so are starting to fall apart in a huge way. And we're going to see a collapse of basically the superstructure that held the world together. And figuring out what comes out of the end is going to be really complicated. And I do think that, like, the last time things like this happened, it was the lead up to World War II. And so we need to really think about what that's going to look like in a modern context. The obvious question, have you read Gramsci? Oh, man. Very good joke. Much tabby, many love. Do you like living in Toronto, Tristan? Jenga Tree 121. Yes, I like living in Toronto. It's actually my probably favorite city that I've lived in. I like that I can do pretty much anything I want. The other night you said someone on your Discord tried to construct a left-wing argument against banning immigration. What the hell did they say? Oh, that was somebody who was in the UK who said that they voted for Brexit. And I was like, why would you vote for Brexit? And he said that the British working class was suffering because of the immigration of Polish people into the United Kingdom, and he was arguing that Poles were basically bringing down, like causing a race to the bottom for the working class, and that Britain needed to get out of that. It's basically blaming the victim for the issues of neoliberal capitalism. It was, it was not a well constructed argument. Isn't controlling these people allowed? Isn't controlling where people are allowed to live inherently authoritarian? Yes. Although I'm very much on board with humanity moving to just a few mega cities and trying to interact with nature as little as possible. What do you think of free market mutualism as a superior alternative to capitalism than socialism? I'm not really a fan. Markets have a distinct trend towards concentrating wealth in the hands of very few people. Sorry about that, friends. Michael Kirshner, have you read the People's Socialist Atlas? I have not. Jenga Tree 121, do you think capitalism is a fancier name for feudalism? All right, we already talked about that. Will we still get Starfleet? I hope Night Watchers, Pat. Star Trek is my desired end goal for. I want Star Trek to be real. That is my political ideology. There's this one episode of Family Guy, and I know it's fiction, but hear me out. In the episode, people got rid of government. Would it really descend into chaos? No. It would for a little bit. I do think that if we just got rid of the government tomorrow, there would be chaos for probably a few months. But once we realize that we can still make the world work without having authoritarian systems, we would slowly reorganize and we would rebuild a society. I'm not sure if it. Given the socialization that we've had, I worry that we would move back to a capitalist paradigm rather than move to an anarcho-communist perfect society. But I think that it's better to do a process than to just do a hard reset. That's why I'm not for military revolution, because one, we'd never win, and two, it would not work. It would not. We need to be changing culture and building narrative and constructing the infrastructure and organization that humanity needs to survive. How would an anarchist society deal with the threat of religion? Well, I think that religion is not a threat. Religion is a catalyst for things that people already believe in. So the idea of authoritarian fasci Christians becoming a new de facto totalitarian theocracy or whatever is more a product of people having an authoritarian mindset. There are Christians who are anarchists, there are Christians who are communists, there are Christians who are anti-capitalist, and religion is something that is always being reinterpreted and changed. And so in my mind, if you produce a society that did not value authoritarianism and did not value oppression, that religion would change, as it has through all of human history. Christianity used to be pro-slavery, and it's not anymore, and that was a gradual change. I walk into anarcho-communist police. Do I get to start taking part in direct democracy right away, or must I apply for citizenship? If the later, how? I think that you should watch American Johnson's non-compete video about contracts, which I think is really cool, about moving into a commune and building a home. There's some places in Spain that do this, where if you show up and you sign a contract saying you want to live in this community, very often they will give you the resources to help build a home and all those things. But yeah, you do have to make an agreement to be part of it. And then as soon as you are part of it, then yeah, you should be able to get involved and vote and all those kinds of things. But the better explanation is on the channel Non-Compete. Question, what's the likelihood of capitalism ending or at least significantly losing its power? Fairly high. It's actually kind of inevitable. It's just whether it happens in a good way or in a brutal flame-out that kills everybody. And I'd like to prefer the latter I'd like to stop the latter from happening if I possibly can. What's your favorite movie? Oh, geez. I don't know. I always mess up on this one. Pass. Are you in favor of abandoning Earth and living in space colonies? I actually would be. If we had the means to live in space and let the Earth's ecosystem get on by without us, I feel like that would be a better option, because when humans interact with nature, we destroy it, and I would prefer if we could somehow save it. Yeah, Girthax. Okay, I think that in some ways you don't really get what the point of religion is. Anyways, a new video is born. There you guys go. Enjoy it. I hope to have lots of comments and lots of likes, and I hope you guys really enjoy this video. So, see you guys later. Sorry that was so fast.